Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Basecamp, launched by Chase in partnership with Denver Startup Week. I'm Eric Matisik. I'm one of the co-organizers of Denver Startup Week, and we're really pleased that you're here today. Purpose of Leadership Spotlights are really to showcase some entrepreneurs who are really building amazing companies and letting them share some tips and tricks in their experience to help you build better businesses. And so today, we have a really special guest, not from Colorado, but in from out of town to help us out.
I'm a native here, so
Even better. A native from Colorado.
Odd, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so the purpose of these is just to really allow them to share knowledge as to how they've best built their companies, kind of give you a purview into what they're doing. And DataHero is a really cool business that we're going to be able to talk about for the next half hour. So let me introduce Jeff Zabel really quickly. 10 years of product development and management experience. Formerly worked at BMW, taking concepts from ideas to prototype and ultimately into production. He has 2 U.S. patents and won the BMW Innovation Award in 2006. Currently, he's co-founder and chief product officer at DataHero, and DataHero quickly helps customers visualize their data without having any major IT tools or training. Totally awesome company. And I had a chance to meet Jeff a little bit when I was in San Francisco late last year, and really fascinated by his company then. And I think, Jeff, it'd be great for you to, what is DataHero? Tell us a little about the business and how you came up with the idea and what you're really solving.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And first off, thanks for having me here. As you know, of course, it's a Bay Area company, but obviously feel the ties back to Colorado, being from here, and it's always great to be here. And this is actually my inaugural Denver Startup Week event, so it's really cool what you guys have put together and what's on here today. But yeah, to DataHero, what DataHero is it's a first cloud self-service BI platform, basically business intelligence. So what that means is people have a lot of data out there today, and data is becoming more prevalent. It's proliferating at a quick pace, and the end business users really just need a way to be able to visualize it, make quick decisions on it, be able to understand it better. Data analytics is a scary term. It can be scary, so how do you take something that's scary like that to somebody without a data background and make it really easy for that person to use? And that's what DataHero provides. So, everything from being able to sign up and just create those quick charts and graphs, figure out what you need to do, make some great presentations, and really understand at a core and make better decisions on your business based on the data you're seeing.
So coming from BMW, it sounds like a really complex business that you're making a really simple solution that is easy to use. How'd you start up? How did it begin?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think like any startup, it started with personal experience. What I was doing at BMW at the end of my career there was working on our BMW Apps and Mini Connected platform. And basically what that is a way to allow you to use your iPhone applications in your vehicle. And what was interesting is we were trying to figure out what iPhone applications do people want to use in their vehicle, and where did those come from? And so I was working in a business development role with a bunch of the third parties, the Pandoras, the Spotifys, the Audibles of the world, and trying to figure out what apps should we put in their car. And we had, for the first time, a lot of data on what apps people were already using in their car, data about how people were driving, how long they were driving. We never had that before, but now they're connecting, that data was available. And these third parties had a lot of data available to them, Pandora, Spotify, Audible, and some of them were able to make good decisions on it. And we were able to make good decisions on our own data, but when we tried to combine them, we were ultimately stuck. So each company basically had their individual business intelligence systems in place, and I could tell you how many people were ordering an option, or I could tell you how many people were listening to certain ads on Pandora, or whatever it might be. But when it came down to something that wasn't core to the overall business, but to a specific project or lower, it was really difficult to make a data-driven decision. And the tool that we had available to us was Excel. And Excel is a great tool, but it took a lot of effort, and it's not just effort inside the product itself, it's the effort through the entire process from getting the data in all the way through making that decision. And that's kind of how DataHero got started, was taking a look at that. I was blessed to know my co-founder, Chris Newman, whose background is actually in data, was coming off of an exit, and he was seeing the same thing where he worked at a company called Aster, which was kind of one of the founders of the big data space. And the problem was once you had this big data and you brought it down to small data, the end user just wanted to be able to analyze it and understand it and use it, and that was complicated. So he and I started talking. We had met earlier. I did my graduate degree at Stanford, and we were part of the start of the D School, which is design school. Did a class there together, and we started talking. We thought, well, if we have this problem, do other people have this problem as well? And we started to take a look around and try to figure out did other people experience the same pain? And the answer was, of course, yes. So we did kind of formed together and said, well, let's start DataHero and kick it off.
You said earlier that when you were at BMW, you were in a business development role, and now you're leading product and UX at DataHero. How'd you make that transition? How'd you get into developing the product piece, or was it natural from your work at BMW?
Yeah, actually, it kind of started a lot earlier. So technically and formally trained, I'm an engineer, a mechanical engineer at that. After I graduated, I always knew I wanted to apply my work a little bit differently. I like solving problems. And so I started with Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture. And basically my role was to look at business operations and processes and find technologies that would solve needs and fit that. And while I was working at Anderson, I was on a project at eBay, and it was doing some really boring stuff, actually. It's kind of, towards bug tracking and version control. But while we were there, another friend of mine was at HP doing an equally kind of boring project. It was, they had a bunch of excess inventory at the end of runs, printers, hardware, et cetera, and they were selling them to liquidators for pennies on the dollar. And his role was basically, how do I reduce that? How do I make the end of that run have less inventory left over? And I said, we were sitting at lunch and we were goofing around, and I said, well, give me 10 of those and I'll sell them on eBay and we'll make a killing. And we kind of looked at each other and thought, my goodness, why can't you do that? And at that time, eBay was a pure consumer-to-consumer marketplace. If I had one item and somebody else had a single item, I could figure out how to sell it to that person. And a lot of the end transaction was through email. It's very personal. So we approached a couple of the partners and ended up forming a joint venture between eBay and Anderson. At the time, it was called Connection to eBay. And that basically morphed into eBay stores. And so that allowed mass retailers to basically list 100 hammers from Home Depot and sell them to individual consumers through eBay as a marketplace. And I think that change there was from an engineering standpoint, understanding what it takes to combine technology and product and put those together. I ended up going back to Stanford, as I mentioned, where I met Chris, and being one of the first members of the D School, and really learning from some great people there. So people like David Kelly, who started IDEO, if you're familiar with IDEO as a design consultancy, Larry Leifer, Bernie Roth, these guys really led design and design thinking. And that really took me to where, I am today. So at heart, I'm an engineer. I approach things very methodically. But at the same time, design can be a methodical process.
Well, it sounds like you give some really good examples of eBay and BMW and your experience at D School, and also some of the applications of DataHero as being used today. What makes it really special as a startup? Like what's the culture like? What makes it unique as a data business? Like, what makes it exciting?
Yeah, that's a great question. As a data business, what makes it exciting? And it's funny because I get that question a lot from friends. They're like, how did you go from designing cool things in cars to a data business? And it's interesting. I think data is becoming a lot more interesting and a hotter topic, and I think it can be applied a lot broader. And that's what brought me to it at its core. And I think what's different about DataHero is where we started with a focus on design. So typically in a business intelligence company, you start with the technology and you start with the IT department, the technologists, and how do I build out the answers to the question? And from an engineering standpoint, there's a lot of cool stuff that happens beneath big data and what you hear about it. There's some really cool technologies underneath that really enable those end visions. But I think what's different about DataHero is that we started with the end user. So we took that first piece of the design process, and I'll kind of go through that a little bit of how I approach design. And it's really starting with empathy and understanding what those end use cases are and how people use your product and how people need to get to an answer or what the answer they want to get to is, and how do you enable that in a simple to use process. And I think that's what separated us overall. So, point in case, our first hire was our creative director, and she's a head of UI. I think that's really unique for a data company for the first hire to hire someone who's really good at user interfaces, graphic design, et cetera. And that's about, that piece I talked about earlier about data being complicated. How do you make it super simple for the end user, the person who's scared of it, to make it approachable?
Since you've launched the company, what are some of the new applications you're seeing DataHero being used for that surprised you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get these all the time. All the time. There's, our core customer use cases, right? It's the sales vertical, it's the marketing vertical, it's people in operations, sales ops, et cetera. But it's what's really incredible and actually very challenging too is the broad use cases, because data can be applied almost anywhere and across different use cases. So I think two of the ones that really stand out to me was genetic drug discovery was one that I never really considered. Basically, they have a bunch of different compounds that they're trying to test, and they run thousands of tests a day against these specific compounds. And what they need to do is very quickly create the same charts and graphs to analyze across as they're developing their drugs, which ones reacted to the enzyme or protein, which ones did not. They had been doing it in Excel, so when they found DataHero, they thought this was incredible, right? They could do this over and over very quickly. It solved their need, it solved their use case, but it was something we never designed the product specifically, for that application.
That's awesome. Let's shift a little bit to startup communities. When you having relationships and understanding, growing up here in Colorado and seeing what we're building here now, and then being in San Francisco, what do you see that Colorado could do next, or the things that you think that San Francisco that makes it what it is, that we have some inklings or things happening here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think what Denver and Boulder is doing now is incredible. The community that's formed here is much different than the community that I see in Silicon Valley. And that's not a good thing nor a bad thing. They're just different. People here are incredible with their time, their expertise, reaching out to each other. It's a really open place. Something like this in Silicon Valley, I think, would Denver Startup Week being this, would be a lot different. In fact, there is not a Silicon Valley Startup Week, or there might be 10 of them. I don't know.
Startup year. Yeah,
startup year. So in that sense, I think Boulder is a really unique community in that sense, and I think a lot of it has changed. And it's owed to people who started things. David Cohen from Techstars really kicking it off and creating that culture from the beginning, I think, was impressive. Guys like our investors from the Founder Group, Ryan McIntyre, coming in and really supporting entrepreneurship here. I think it's great that it's near the university in Boulder. Now expanding into Denver. There's just great opportunities, I think, for startups here in Colorado. I think the hard part for that, in that sense, is that startups have existed for a long time, and that culture has been, when you talk about like design iterations and iteratively approaching things, it's in its umpteenth revision in the Silicon Valley, and it's changed over time. The Silicon Valley has even shifted. You've seen, the shift from Santa Clara in the South Bay in the semi-fab era into Palo Alto, and now startups shifting into, Soma and San Francisco. And there's reasons that, that shift occurred and why things happened the way they did, each of it based on the previous revision. I think what will be interesting for Denver and Boulder is figuring out what does that next revision look like, and it's just starting, and I think that's really cool.
Well, we're really excited to have you here, and it's you can just see how Denver Startup Week has grown over the course of the last 3 years. We're in the process of developing an innovation and technology center, and considering some elements around digital design and design process at a facility here in Denver. In your experience, what can you summarize, like either trends or elements in the design process that entrepreneurs can apply, or if you're just starting a company, when is the right time to focus on design? It sounds like your first hire was design, yeah. and clearly your choice, but depending on the business, what do you think the best time is?
Yeah, and I think the interesting part of that question is, where do you consider design? And as a user experience guy and a product guy, I consider design being the first step that you do. And when I look at design, I look at it in a 5-step process. So the first step is empathy. Basically, understand your users, understand your use case. We talked about, as we started DataHero, looking and figuring out what do people want to do. So we did a ton of research, and it's not just asking people, it's observing people. If you can think about it like you carry a camera or do carry a camera with you and just take pictures of each scenario and go through and watch 20 people try to get from data to, in our case, I guess, data to, the answer, what steps do they take? Mm-hmm. And you'll start to see certain patterns emerge, especially if you can clear snapshot it with a camera. The next step is really to define it. So define your problem. So that's step 2. And that takes all that first step of design and then loops it basically into clear definitions. What problem are you trying to solve? What does this look like to you? Where do you scope your business? The third step is basically to go back out and ideate. So there can be a million solutions of those definitions of your problem on how to solve it. The more, the better, the more volume you produce and the greater the ideation, the better that your solutions will be. One of my favorite things I learned was something called the dark horse prototype, and that's where you take something that's way out there and just try it to see what happens. And sometimes they work, and half the time they miserably fail. And when they miserably fail, you also learn something. And I think that's really important to just get as many solutions out there as possible. And then the fourth step is prototype. And you really need to follow that super quickly against the ideation. So take a few of those and develop the most low-fidelity, fastest prototype you can. It can be in PowerPoint. When we were starting DataHero, we had this charting interface, and we were trying to figure out how to make it easy to use. And we physically cut out pieces of paper that we carry around with us, and that was our screen. And we'd have people use it, and we'd have them drag things around. Where do you expect things to be? How do you, take your own piece of paper and write? And we watch them and see how they expected to use the product. And the next step is testing, and that's physically taking that prototype you have, taking whatever there, and testing with it. And the faster you can go through that iteration loop over and over and over, I think the more successful design you'll be. So, when I look at design, it's not even just UI. It needs to be all-encompassing. And, that will help influence your sales. It helps influence your marketing. It helps influence all aspects of your company.
When you were in the fundraising process, you've got some great local investors like Foundry, and who else includes in your investor roster?
Locally, David Cohen, and then we have a bunch of angels from the Silicon Valley as well.
And when you went through the process of raising capital, how important was it, do you think, design in the discussion? Was it something that differentiated you as a data company or as a BI business in that sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was really unique. I think it was something different, and especially, my background, when you looked at, designing cars or working at eBay or whatever it might be, those are two very different experiences than working with data. In fact, I had zero inkling for what a data company should be. And I don't know if that was attractive or scary, right? The nice thing is I came from a clean slate background, and I could really, I could look at things objectively, and that's that first step. And the empathize step is figuring out objectively what is the problem and how do I solve that. I'm still trying to understand that today, and I think that's what makes it really interesting. And so I think that was a differentiator. And, the fact that the other differentiator was the fact that the design made it so easy. So I mentioned that we're one of the only self-service products. Traditionally, data has been not only standoffish from an approachability standpoint of how easy is it to use, but it's difficult from a company perspective in terms of what it takes to get there. If I just have a question, I need it answered. Typically, there's a sales, some type of sales process immediately. Your IT department gets devolved, if you have one, very quickly. DataHero is unique in that it scales from an end individual with like spreadsheets all the way up through, a Fortune 500 company that already has a business intelligence solution in place, but is using Salesforce and Zendesk and what else not, and wants to pull the data in from those sources as well.
What's the best piece of advice you've got as an entrepreneur since you've been running DataHero?
That's a great question. You get a million pieces of advice from, every aspect. I think it's not the one piece of advice that you get, but how many you can get. So it's kind of like that design and iterative step is drink from a fire hose, and ask everyone. And everyone will have different insight into your business. They'll have different insight into what makes it successful, how to, design your product better, do better sales, have better marketing. The more that you can just drink and figure that out, and then you can test it yourself, I think the better off you'll end up being. I don't think there's one piece of overarching advice that that I got or received that I think would be that stood out. Yeah, game changing or stood out more than another.
Well, let's open up some questions from the audience. I think having an entrepreneur like you in town from California is awesome for everyone to ask some questions as well. Anyone have some specific questions for Jeff? Yes, sir.
No, we are far from a public company so far. So we're a pretty small company. Right now, I think we only have about 14 people. So we operate a lot larger than we appear in terms of employee manpower. It's kind of one of those secrets, I guess, to a SaaS business, right? Which is really great. But we're not public, no. We're a venture funded company and working from there.
Next question.
So what's the business model? How do you make your money?
Yeah, great question. So basically the way DataHero works is it's a freemium style product. So anyone can sign up by law, and I talked about the accessibility being important, right? And that's where that fits into the business model, is how do you make it so someone can sign up immediately, they can get from step one all the way through the end and get some value out of it. And then we sell on top of that. So our functionality basically allows you to create any type of graph you want, bring in your data from any source, make that very easy. And then it's the things that make it easier on top that we sell. So we have a subscriber license business model, so it's per seat. And when you buy that license, you get the ability to update your data automatically. So now that I've created all these charts and graphs, how do I keep that up to date? This was something that, as we observed our users, we watched them create these charts over and over. So you have your board presentation, it's the same data coming in, you're making the same charts, but the data is always changing. So I want to make those charts once and then basically set it and forget it and have that available to me in a dashboard, make it very easy to put into a presentation. Add my corporate color scheme to it. All these the pieces that make it easier for you to use are the upsell in our product. I think it's really interesting, from a freemium business model, looking at it and figuring out our conversion rates are very good, because once you do get that value immediately, people see, okay, this is great, I can do it once, but now, and it worked for me, and that was very nice, but how do I make it even easier? And that's where we convert.
From your data sources, where do you see the most growth in data coming from?
Growth in terms of size, or?
So from your customers, when they're collecting data from sources, what sources do you see as the most rapidly growing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically today I think we connect to 25 different SaaS services. So you can connect to Salesforce, you can connect to Zendesk, financial, transactional information from like Stripe, Braintree, Zora, etc. And basically our initial hypothesis was to try to figure out what were those functional verticals that drove the biggest growth, and where do people have the greatest need. And we tested by kind of our first 6 services that we had were across different domains. So it was customer support, it was sales and marketing, or sales, there was marketing, there was operational, things like GitHub. And our hypothesis originally was that we would find one of those verticals that grew way faster than other ones. The truth of the matter was that the data was pretty spread out. So not only did it not come from an individual functional area overwhelmingly more than another, but people would bring in their own spreadsheets from Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever, and that data was unique from a system that we've never heard of or wasn't even supported. So the growth was really spread out. That being said, there are a few areas that are excelling, especially with data. Customer support being one of those, sales operations being another, and then just overall marketing and marketing automation systems kind of are the top areas that people bring in. Overall, we focus on 6 total functional verticals.
Any last questions? Well, Jeff, thank you very much for being
Thank you,
here from
yeah.
California.
Appreciate it.
Where can everyone find your business and easiest way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, business is datahero.com.
Follow you on Twitter?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. It's JC Zabel. Or you can just email me anytime, jeff@datahero.com.
Well, thank you very much. This concludes our Leadership Spotlight with our guest, Jeff Zabel. We've got a really great lineup coming up as well with Feld and Friends this afternoon, as well as some really a pitch fest to pitch Techstars as well. So encourage you all to stick around. Jeff, thank you very much. And,
Thank you for
look
having
forward
me.
to spending some time with you.
Thank you.